Here's a pitch on the way. He swings and fouls it off, and the man from Walla Walla will take that one home. Swing, there's a drive to left. That one is long gone.
Now, I might have been a small part of your life, but you've been a very large part of mine. And it's my privilege and honor to share with you the greatest game of all.
What is going on, everybody? I know it is late on a Thursday night, but we are here without technical difficulty like last week, which was frustrating, but we pushed through and got some content out there for you about the Tigers' 40-man roster this offseason and some ideas that I have about it. And if you want to discuss that, there was an article that was put out earlier this week as well regarding that 40-man and the cuts that need to take place because of it. I'm here. I'm here to talk baseball tonight. I know we got playoff baseball going on, which we're going to talk about. I know there's NFL Thursday night football, but let's be honest. Thursday night football is not really worth your time these days because, well, it's just not really worth your time, especially when there's baseball to talk about. So make sure that as you are watching tonight, go ahead, toss those comments down in the chat below. Would love to talk to you, answer questions, just have a general baseball discussion. We're going to start and we're going to talk about the playoffs specifically. We are down to 4 teams because of upsets that happened all across the division series. And, Richard, I wish we could say this a little bit more often during the postseason, and that is go Tigers, right? I wish that we could say it a little bit more during the postseason, but I think that we're going to get there, and we're going to talk all about that tonight, specifically talking about key free agents that I think that they can target that aren't going to be splashes. I don't think there's splashes to be made this offseason, but I'm going to give you 5 names, 5 signings. One of them potentially in-house with an extension that we're going to talk about at the end, but 4 guys specifically with another one in my brain kind of rolling around that I'm still debating upon whether or not I want to talk about him or not coming to the Tigers. But it's the offseason. We're ready to talk. I'm ready to hear your thoughts. I'm ready to answer your questions and just enjoy the game of baseball. But before we go any further talking about playoffs, I do want to remind you that wherever you're at on social media, make sure that you're following Detroit Sports Nation. Like us, follow us, subscribe specifically on YouTube, and pound that bell so that you get notifications when our latest content drops, because it's coming at you every day. So make sure that you are following and have those notifications on, because you're getting content from the corner. You're getting content from Griffin and Bass. Beyond the Boxes live every Monday night as well, talking about the Lions. And then we got Rain City Roar Sundays after the Lions games, that content just continuously dropping. So make sure that you are following us there. So let's talk about playoff baseball and what has gone on over the last week. I was kind of with you last Thursday when we had a little bit of technical difficulties. I know I got to YouTube. I know I got to Facebook eventually, but it was a little bit different than what we're doing now. There's been a lot that's taken place. My predictions that I made last Thursday, not good, but I was correct when I told you that there would be one NL seed, top seed, either the Braves or the Dodgers that lost. I just didn't go far enough, apparently, because they both lost. Both of them were upset. The Philadelphia Phillies playing some pretty doggone good baseball, and the San Diego Padres holding the Los Angeles Dodgers 0 for 20 at one point in that series with runners in scoring position. That's how you beat good baseball teams. You play good defense, you pitch well, and you don't let them score runs. And that leaves us with a NL championship series of the San Diego Padres and the Philadelphia Phillies, 2 fan bases that have longed for postseason baseball, much like we have longed here in Detroit for postseason baseball for a while now. And they're getting it. Philadelphia, man, they're rocking. You talk about a really good NFL football team in the Eagles, who are undefeated still. You've got playoff baseball in Philadelphia. The Flyers are starting. It's a pretty good time to be. I don't know much about hockey, and I don't even know if the Flyers are good, but there's always excitement when the season starts, right? And then you got the 76ers as well with Harden and Embiid. So there's like it's a good time to be a Philadelphia sports fan right now because my goodness, like all your teams are performing well. And by all intents and purposes, the Philadelphia Phillies should be up 2-0 right now. They should have swept San Diego in San Diego, because they, you know, are playing really good baseball. They had I think a 4-run lead in game 2, and then they ended up losing 8-5. Like, that's tricky and that's tough, but those 2 teams are 2 of the more exciting teams in this playoff series. The AL, look, chalk held in the AL, right? The Yankees and the Astros. Everybody kinda pegged the Yankees and the Astros from the beginning, and, I wouldn't be a true baseball fan if I wasn't doing this show with you right now, and right here to my right had the baseball game on so that I could see it in my peripheral, and currently it's 3-2 with the Yankees leading or the Astros leading the Yankees. Alex Bregman hit a 3-run bomb to left field, and then, the Yankees answered right back with 2 of their own in the top of the 4th. So that's gonna be an exciting series. The Astros owned them during the season, but the Yankees, have found a way to kinda just hang around and be annoying, to everybody. So I would love to hear, kinda what your thoughts are on the playoffs, and this can just be an organic conversation as we go through, the night. I do wanna appreciate tell you thank you for stopping by. I've got, uh Good day, good prayers, Kevin. Greenhoe here saying that Bregman hit one, reminded me of that. So I appreciate that. And it wasn't just that he hit one, he torched one, and it was worth 3 runs, which could be all the Astros need at a certain point. Um, in game 1 of the Philadelphia Phillies and the San Diego Padres, that ball that Kyle Schwarber hit, I don't think there has been a human being in the history of baseball that has hit a ball better than Kyle Schwarber with 120-mile-per-hour exit velocity and a just straight piss missile to the upper deck in right field, like, just a ridiculous, ridiculous monster shot by Schwarber, and it got them. I mean, when Schwarber and Harper are hitting your home runs, it is going to be a good thing for, the Philadelphia Phillies. Richard Moore, thank you for the comment saying, "I'm just rooting for Verlander." It's interesting. It's interesting. I am curious how many Tigers fans are actually still rooting for Verlander, to succeed. Look, he should win the AL Cy Young this year. He's incredible. I mean, I put him on the graphic, right? I mean, he's right here, because I knew that there would be some Detroit ties. If we can't be in the postseason this year, at least we can live, vicariously through the person who was once the face of our franchise. And so I I don't know how I feel about that, Richard. I'm gonna be honest with you. JV, there's multiple reasons for this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments too. When JV was traded to the Astros in 2017, I did root for him in 2017. I did want him to get that ring because I knew that they weren't getting it. He wasn't getting it here in Detroit anytime soon. So I did. I was an Astros fan from August till October, but the day that World Series ended, I was done rooting for Justin Verlander. Not in the sense that I don't want him to succeed, not in the sense that I still don't long for the day that he comes back and dons the old English D and there's this homecoming parade and all is well and right with the world again. But he's not a Tiger. And my second reason for not rooting for him is if Verlander wins the Cy Young this year, wins maybe another postseason award, and wins a second World Series with the Houston Astros, his days as a Tiger are going to be long forgotten. His days as, a lock for Cooperstown with a Detroit Tigers hat on his bust is not going to happen. I made the case on an earlier episode of The Corner when the Astros were in town that actually since he's moved to Houston, he's been a better pitcher statistically. And I just worry, as any fan would with, slappy connotations, would worry that, what, all the good juju and mojo that he had, homegrown kid, coming up through the Detroit Tigers system, then becomes the ace and the face of the franchise. And it's a dark day in Detroit when he's traded, and he gets traded to the Astros and wins 2 World Series and a Cy Young. I mean, it would be tough. It would be tough to bring him back to Detroit, and it would be tough to see any way conceivable that he ends up in Cooperstown. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that of these 2 series that are going right now. If I have to make a pick, and I'm going to actually ask you this question and see who's going to respond in the comments, and I would love to throw them up on screen. But if I look at these 2 series, these are 2 teams that are 4 teams in 2 series that are actually quite evenly matched. The series could really go any way at all. And it's hard to pick winners. It really is, because obviously I was wrong about the doggone um, ALDS. I thought the Guardians might give the Yankees a little bit more trouble, which, I mean, they had trouble, right? They were playing until Wednesday with rain delays and all these other things going on, and eventually they persevered. But I thought it was going to be the Astros and the Guardians, and I thought it was going to be the Phillies and the Dodgers. And then my prediction was that it was going to be the Astros and the Dodgers in the World Series. That's not going to be the case. And so when we talk about these series, when we look at these series, for some reason, I feel like I'm pulling for the Yankees. I don't know. I don't like Aaron Boone. I actually want them to lose so that Aaron Boone gets fired, because I'm just kind of sick of seeing Aaron Boone. But at the same time, I'm also kind of sick of hearing about the Astros. Now, the Astros are the most complete team in this playoffs. I mean, they hit the ball, they run the bases well, they play good defense, they have the pitching, the starting pitching, they have the bullpen. Like, they are the most complete team in these playoffs. So they're going to be a tough out, and I would not be surprised if this New York Houston series goes 6-7 games. But I will say that if the Yankees want to win this series, they have to find a way to not let it go 7 games. If it goes 7 games, they're going home and golfing. They won't be in the World Series. If it gets to 7, Astros are winning. If it ends before then, I could see a way that the Yankees pull it off. In the NL, I think it's pretty simple. I like Philadelphia and what they have to offer more than I like what San Diego has to offer. But in the playoffs, your pitching is what matters. And when you look at the pitching of the San Diego Padres with Darvish and Snell and Musgrove and Clevenger, even though Clevenger's having a bit of a down year, and then you look at their bullpen, right? And they acquired Josh Hader, who's been phenomenal the last few months of the season. When those things hold true in the postseason, and you've got an offense that can hit the ball with Soto and Bell and Manny Machado and Brandon Drury and those types of players, I don't think a team's going to be able to slug their way to the World Series like the Phillies want to do. So if I were to make a bet right now, if I were to make a prediction of the World Series and who's going to be in the World Series, I'm going to go with the Astros in 7, and I'm going to go with the Padres. And that series is probably going to go at least 6 games. It's going to go back and forth continually. We may even see 2 7-game series. And that's not a bad thing. Yes, it's more baseball, which makes it a good thing automatically, but for the teams that are looking to win the World Series, that break in between you do not want. The Tigers fell victim to it twice. In 2012 and in 2006. They had time off and lost to 2 teams that were arguably worse on paper than they were. But as one of my good friends always says and likes to remind me, rest is rust. And that holds true with playoff baseball. You saw that with the wild card series, right? The teams that came out of those wild card series gave those top seeds fits. Philadelphia getting emotional wins in the wild card against St. Louis, just dominating St. Louis. and then taking that momentum and carrying it over into Atlanta, and then, San Diego and their hard-fought wild card series against the New York Mets and taking that into Los Angeles, losing the first game to Los Angeles and then winning the next 3, or the next 2. No, it was 3. Yeah, it was 3. So, you don't want to rest too long in the playoffs because it does ultimately equate to rust, and it makes things very, very difficult. Uh, Johnson was a Johnson Family Farm Johnson. Tigers need to re-sign JV and at least 1 or 2 starters and a big bat. We're gonna get into that. That's actually where we're going next, Johnson. So thanks for the segue, Richard. I think I brought up some bad memories for Richard here. He said 2006 was the worst. That hurt more, in my opinion. Yeah, because on paper you were the much better team in 2006. And it was really unforced errors created by your team that was the reason why you lost. Pitchers being unable to throw the ball to first base and field their position correctly, and just unforced errors that led to, those losses. So you don't really want to see too much rust pile up through the rest that happens in the playoffs. Kevin Greenhoe says, I hope Rogers becomes a good catcher in Detroit. He is the only player in that deal that could stay in Detroit. With Dingler doing good, he could even be surpassed. And Kevin, you're correct. As you know, they removed Franklin Perez, who was the big piece of that deal, off of the 40-man roster last season. And then in my recent article and the episode from the corner last week, one of my suggestions of someone to non-tender a contract to and get off the 40 man is Daz Cameron. Not because I don't like Daz, but just because he hasn't gotten enough of a shot. There's probably a reason why he hasn't gotten enough of a shot, and there's no room. When you're talking about Baду, who's younger, when you're talking about Kerry Carpenter, who hits better, when you're talking about Austin Meadows, who has been a more productive professional, and Riley Green, who's the prized possession of the organization at this point, when you're talking about those guys, there's no spot for a Daz Cameron. There's no spot for him, and it does suck because the pieces that you got back from your big piece being traded netted you nothing. Potentially a catcher, but Rogers at best projects to be a good platoon type backup catcher. And catcher is one of those reasons or areas that we are going to, I'm sorry about that. One of those areas that we are going to acknowledge tonight. But before we do get to um, talking about who the Tigers need to sign, let's talk about GearUpDetroit.shop. There is a collection of Detroit Sports Nation original design t-shirts. You can use the corner 25 off to get 25% off your next purchase. So make sure you're heading over to gearupdetroit.shop and get some original DSN swag while you're at it. Okay, so let's talk about the offseason blueprint part 2. Part 1, and you can find that article on DetroitSportsNation.com. It has my byline, AJ Reilly, the 40-man roster and what to do with it. And through that blueprint, what I talked about was the Tigers currently sit at 49 players on their 40-man roster that need to essentially get down to 40 by about mid-November. And they'll go into the offseason with 40 people. That means that they have to cut 9 players. But if you get into it a little bit deeper, there's more intricacies to it. 49 includes Daniel Norris and Tucker Barnhart. Both of those contracts are going to come off the 40-man when the World Series ends 5 days later. So now you're down to 47. You have to protect 2 players. Well, you have to protect your Rule 5 prospects. It could be 2 players. It could be as many as I think there's 5 or 6 that are eligible. In my piece, I suggested that you protect 2 of them, Parker Meadows and Reese Olson. So that brings you back up to 49. Now, you can cut only 9 players and be at 40 and go into the offseason, or you can go down to 39 and be at a Rule 5 and have an option to draft at the Rule 5 draft. If you draft someone from the Rule 5 draft, they have to remain on your active roster for the entire season, or else you have to send them back to the team that you drafted them from. It's going to be interesting because when we get into part 2 of this blueprint, which we're talking about here, okay, we're talking about free agent acquisitions and who the Tigers could sign. 5 players, and one of them, I'm going to be very upfront with you, is an extension. It's a younger player that I think could be extended for a longer period of time, giving him a bit of a raise, but also locking him up for long term, and if the success continues, actually getting him for a much cheaper value than what he would be worth at that time. But before we get into the blueprint, I do want to get to some of your comments here. Mike Doyle, thanks for stopping by and thanks for the comment, buddy. He says, if the Yankees lose, what it would take, or what would it take to Garrett Cole from the Yankees next season? What would it take to get Garrett Cole from the Yankees next season? Probably more than you're willing to part with for a um, front end of the rotation guy, no doubt about that. But also, um, if you remember Scott Harris's, is his press conference, he said they asked him, what were your guys' feelings about the Tigers farm system, and he was a little coy, right? He goes, I'm not gonna really get into what we thought about the Tigers farm system, but you kind of walked away from that feeling that there wasn't a very high opinion of the Tigers farm system. And if that's the case, then he knows that he's kind of dealing from a bare cupboard, right? And that makes things difficult to acquire players like Garrett Cole. The other thing on top of that is, would the Yankees even be willing to part with him? I feel like that would be a very difficult uh, acquisition to make. Johnson Family Farms, they say Rogers, I believe, will be fine. We have bigger holes to fill on the roster. Yeah, for sure. But we also don't know what is uh, going on with Rogers either. So catcher is definitely a need this offseason. He made the correction that we have bigger holes to fill on the roster. And you're correct. We do have bigger holes to fill. Um, there are a number of pitchers that are on the IL currently right now. Bo Brisky's on the IL, Spencer Turnbull, Tarek Skubal, Matt Manning, Casey Mize, Kyle Funkhauser, Rodney Garcia, um, and then you have Austin Meadows and Jake Rogers, who are also on that 40-man roster. What we know about the Tigers pitching staff and what we learned about the Tigers pitching staff this season is that it's not overly horrible. Yes, there were some young guys that were pressed into a situation that they weren't ready for. Elvin Rodriguez specifically. I wouldn't say that starting pitching is a desperate need, but it is a need because you always need arms. However, there isn't an arm included on my list tonight. There's not. Because we know that the roster construction that Al Avila went with was very arm heavy, very arm specific, and lacked positional depth and lacked quality positional players, which is why the majority of the players that I cut in blueprint number 1, part 1, were position players. Was Willie Castro, was Victor Reyes, Daz Cameron, Zach Short. Cutting those guys allows you room on your roster to then replace them with better positional players. And there are some free agents to be that I think will solidify our positional grouping. Now, the one thing that should be noted is that the Tigers were actually a pretty darn good defensive team this year. Jonathan Scope today was actually named a finalist for the Gold Glove at second base. Had statistically one of the best defensive seasons a second baseman has had in a long time, if not ever. But there's pieces that are missing. specifically when you look at the corner outfield. Center field's locked up. If Riley Green needs to play center field next year again, that's okay because he's a really good center fielder. Now, if you caught my interview with Lynn Henning a few weeks ago, he was also talking about how Parker Meadows has kind of pushed the envelope a little bit and would be a better fit in center field, which would then move Riley to left field, which is also okay. You cannot go wrong having an athletic outfield. But there's a need in the outfield. We don't truly know what Kerry Carpenter is going to be. He, I thought, was maybe, aside from Green, obviously, but the second most encouraging prospect that came up this season. He adjusted, it seemed well, was hitting for power, played an okay defense. He's not a phenomenal defender. But there's guys on this list tonight that we're gonna talk about that were or are phenomenal, defenders, and so I do wanna get to them, and I do wanna get this, kicked off, and the first need that we're gonna address is we're gonna address catcher. Now, we know that Tucker Barnhart is available, okay? He is a free agent, and so I wanted to bring Tucker Barnhart up because of the catching options available. If you're not going after Contreras from the Cubs, who is a free agent and who most likely will command um, a very, very healthy chunk of change. If you are not going after him, then you want to look at a value, right? You want to look at a guy who offers you good defense or good offense and who will most likely platoon with Eric Haas. Because Eric Haas also performed quite well this season. And at one point in the season, I was saying, you know what? He should be our starting catcher, and let's stop running Tucker Barnhart out there because Tucker Barnhart, statistically this season, if you look here, had an 8% walk rate. He had a 24% strikeout rate. He only hit 221 on the season, and he was a negative .2 WAR player. Okay, with 63 weighted runs created, which is 37% below the major league average. But he's a good defensive catcher. This is the framing statistic from Baseball Savant, and he did a pretty reasonable job as a catcher for the Tigers this season. I mean, he's a good defensive catcher. He can work with a young staff quite well and does some pretty good things there. Red is good. These were previous years. He had a little bit of a down year this year behind the plate, but Barnhart is a cheap option at only about $5 million is what his market value, according to Spot Racket, is about 5 million. Okay. And he is somebody that the Tigers definitely should look at bringing back to see for a number of reasons. Okay. Let's just be very clear about this. I know that that's not popular because you're talking about a guy that hit one home run last season and was nearly an automatic out. But when you're talking about somebody, and I want to show this again, when you're talking about somebody that has an 8% walk rate, you're getting up there. And that's pretty good. Okay. We definitely want to lower the strikeout rate, even though he's been, a little bit higher on the strikeout rate. But you're talking about a guy that at one point was walking 12% of his at bats. On base percentage matters, and on base percentage is very important. On base plus slugging, OBP or OPS, I'm sorry. OPS is going to be a marker that Scott Harris uses, and he said it on the broadcast when they were in Baltimore a few weeks ago. It's going to be one of those statistics that he looks at, your OPS. And Barnhart can be a decent option in free agency. Some of the other catching options that they could target, Christian Vasquez. Look at this. If you look at his sliders on Baseball Savant, a lot of red there. Expected batting average, he's in the 74th percentile. K percentage, he's in the 82nd percentile. Whiff percentage, so he has a great whiff percentage, meaning he doesn't do it that often. He's also about the 60th percentile in framing and the 72nd percentile in in pop time, which is released from catcher's glove, second baseman's glove. If you wanted to sign Vasquez, Spot Rack does not have a specific market value for him right now, but going off of 2022 and him having a pretty decent season that year, he cost this season in 2022 $7 million, which means that salary, or he's going to be looking for a few years, 2, 3, 4 years potentially, and it's gonna be upwards of about probably 9 to 12, somewhere in that range per year, okay? You look at his age, right? He's 32 years old, so are you willing to give a catcher a 3, 4-year contract at $12 million, 9 to $12 million, when you could sign a younger catcher like Barnhart, who's 31? I know it's only a year, but you wouldn't have to sign him as long, because what you're looking at with Barnhart is a little bit of a bridge situation. It's a Jared Goff bridge situation with the Detroit Tigers. You need to get to your prospect catchers that are coming up, your Jake Rogers. And having the insurance of a veteran catcher with a young staff is not a bad move. If I were the Tigers, I think I would try to re-sign Tucker Barnhart. Thoughts, questions, concerns about signing Tucker Barnhart? Throw them in the chat for me, because I would love to talk to you about re-signing Tucker Barnhart. But who's another guy that we could go after? Okay. There are a couple other catchers that are on the market as well. Austin Hedges is one, and not Adam Frazier, and Mike Zunino is another one. But Zunino scares me a little bit because he has a high strikeout rate, a little bit lower of a walk rate, and is not as good defensively as the other guys that we mentioned. Hedges would be a complete bargain buy. He only made $4 million this season. Had a pretty decent season if you look at his sliders. Like, he's a 76th percentile in framing, 65th percentile in pop time. But statistically, I think getting a guy that you know, right? The devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. Getting a guy like Barnhart is almost in the pocket, right? It's something that should be easier to do if, you offer him the right thing. Do you offer him a 2-year deal? No, probably not. I might offer him, to sweeten the pot, a 1-year deal at, maybe 6, maybe 5. His market value is 5.2. I just kinda give him that market value based on his performance, with a mutual option, a club option for the 2nd year at maybe a little bit higher salary with some incentives built in, and then you've got your catching situation. You haven't invested a lot there, and if Jake Rogers comes back and Jake Rogers is as good as people think that he can be, specifically defensively, and we saw the bat come around before he went on the 60-day DL, then you cut bait, right? You cut Barnhart if you need to, you cut Haas if you need to, but having a plethora of catchers is not a bad thing when you talk about um, attrition. When you talk about the wear and tear on a major league catcher's body, um, that's why the Tigers, up until this year, have carried at least 4 catchers on their 40-man, so that way they can replace them when they need to replace them. I think they went into the season this year with 3 on the active roster, just because to kind of get that stamina and all of that built up. Another need that we have is infield, specifically at third base. The reason we have a need at infield is because the very first person that I'm cutting this offseason is Jeimer Candelario. I'm not offering him a contract. I'm getting him off of my 40-man roster, and I'm doing so because he's too streaky. He hasn't really lived up to the billing of what he had to offer when we traded Justin Wilson and Alex Avila for him to the Cubs. We've already traded the other part of that in Isaac Paredes. And because Candy's not lighting the world on fire and his defense is subpar, I'm getting rid of him, which leaves a hole at third base. Now, if we're leaving a hole at third base, there's a couple of internal options that could fill that, right? Cody Clemens is a name that comes to mind, though I'm not I'm not very high on Cody Clemens and Ryan Kreidler. But Ryan Kreidler is not ready yet. Yes, he came up when the rosters expanded, and yes, he played okay, and he played really good defensively. But he needs at least a half of a season or a full season's worth of at-bats in AAA. With him getting injured earlier in the season this year, the Tigers need to be looking outside the organization to fill that infield need. And one of the people that I would look at is Adam Frazier. Adam Frazier plays for the Mariners. He's going to be a free agent. He is 30 years old. We're not going to sign him to a long deal. His market value is at about $10 million, according to Spot Rack. But he's also a versatile player, and he's a better addition to your lineup. Look at his whiff rate, 95 percentile. He puts the bat on the ball. Look at his K rate, 95 percentile. He doesn't strike out often. He also is in the 90th percentile in outs above average, so he's a very quality defender. He's in the 61st percentile for arm strength. Could he play third base? Potentially. Could Jonathan Scope play third base? Potentially. I'm not one for moving people like that. Like, you have a guy that finished as a finalist in the Gold Glove for second base. You don't move him to third base the next season. But at the same time, Frazier is a phenomenal option for the Tigers, especially when it comes to a top of the lineup guy that's going to put the bat on the ball, that's going to see pitches, and is going to play solid defense. You're not giving up a lot if you go and you get somebody like an Adam Frazier. And if you look, he's pretty consistent. Offensively, when we talk about his walk rate, right, it's up around 8, right? 7.6, 7.5. His strikeout rate, look at this strikeout rate, 12% of the time, which is up from 10% of the time in 2021. Yeah, the average doesn't look good. Okay. The weighted runs created is only 19 below major league average. Weighted on base average is 274, but statistically and traditionally statistically, he's been a solid baseball player. An offensive WAR in 2021 of 10.9, an offensive WAR of 6.8, defensive WAR of 10.6, 5.4, 3.4, 4.4. So we're talking about a 1 to 4 WAR player, depending on the way that he plays. And that's definitely somebody that you want on your team. Richard Moore agrees with me. And Richard, I'm glad that you agree with me that you would go for Frazier. I would too, especially if you can get somebody that's versatile. I mean, we saw in the Seattle series when the Tigers ended the season there, he was playing in the outfield, he was playing second base. Like, it's a very, very good option for the Detroit Tigers. Kevin here says a 1-year deal for a free agent gives Dingler an opportunity in 2024 to prove that he's the catcher of the future. Yeah, for sure it does. And that's why I'm going for one of those lower risk guys rather than a Contreras, right? I'm looking at 2023 as a opportunity to right the ship because it went off its moorings in 2022. So when we look at righting the ship, can the Tigers play competitive baseball next season? Yeah, I believe that they can play competitive baseball next season, but they got to make the right moves in the offseason. And some of those moves are going to involve calculated risk. And one of those calculated risks is a guy named Michael Conforto. Michael Conforto did not play in 2022 because he had shoulder surgery after injuring himself working out in January. Working out, getting ready through the lockout, injured. The thing that worries me most about Conforto is the fact that he's represented by a man that I think everybody loves to hate, in Scott Boras. But look at the red on his sliders here. Barrel percentage, 58 percentile. Outs above average, 63 percentile. 62 percentile in whiff percentage. Walk rate in the 87th percentile. Arm strength in the 89th percentile. Chase rate is up in the 80th percentile. Yes, he has not played for a year. And yes, his market value, Spot Rack has him at $20.7 million a year. The comparisons that they were making to him are guys like JT Realmuto for the Phillies at like a 5-year, $20 million per year deal. Because he did not play in 2022, I would offer a lengthier contract. He's 29 years old. So if you could get a 4 to 5 year contract with some player option, club option, right? Maybe a player option or a club option after year 3, maybe a player option after year 4. I would backload it so it's costing you less upfront, even though cap is not really a necessary evil. I mean, it is a necessary evil. It's just not as big of a problem as people make it out to be. I would backload it in the sense that I would offer heavy incentives in those first 2 to 3 years for Michael Conforto. Make sure that the shoulder's good. Make sure that he can come back from not playing for a season and perform well. Well, when Scott Harris talked about risk in his presser, he said, "We're not going to be risk averse. We're going to need to take calculated risks. And we know that outfield has a hole. Michael Conforto fills that hole. Adam Frazier fills the hole on the infield. I like this. I think it's enough of a calculated risk that could have huge rewards if done right and if negotiated properly. So if I'm the Detroit Tigers, I'm going for Conforto. Look at this. Look at this walk rate. 12% walk rate in 21, 10, 13, 13, 13, going up to 2027, 10 in 2016. Oh, and when he was a rookie with only 194 at bats, that's when he was below double digits in his walk rate. Strikeout rate's a little bit high. Okay. Like, let's be very clear about that. Like 20% of the time, 1 out of every 5 at bats. That's difficult, but he's also walking an awful lot. Yeah, we can get into the average, but look at this weighted runs created. Look at the impact that his offense has. This weighted runs created column is huge. How does his offense impact the game and create runs? 33% in 2015 above major league average as a rookie in 194 at bats. 47% above major league average in 440 at bats in 2017. 19% in 2018. 27%, 58% in 2020, the shortened season, and 6% in 2021. The guy makes an impact offensively and would be a phenomenal addition. Would be a phenomenal addition to the Tigers in this offseason if he were to make or if we were to make a deal here. So Kevin has a question here. He says, "What about Andre Lepicius, second baseman who can play third?" Lepicius is on the bubble for the Rule 5. He's one of the ones that I did not protect in the Rule 5 draft in my blueprint, in the first blueprint. So he could potentially be picked up by another team if the team chooses not to protect him. One of the reasons why I did not protect him was because of the crowding issue and the amount of people that we have. I I think that he would be a good player to protect, but he would not be my first choice. Meadows would be my first choice. Olsen would be my second choice. Yeah, Winfield Perez, who also needs to be protected, but he's 1 year away from minor league free agency, so is he worth protecting? And Lepicius could very well, be another guy that they protect. The one thing that holds true is the fact that you're going to see a lot of movement over these next few weeks. Once 5 days after the World Series hits, expect a flurry of moves. And most of those moves are gonna be the Tigers did not offer a contract to this guy. They did not offer a contract to this guy. And I will caution you as fans. I will tell you very carefully as fans, and remember these words. You're going to be parting with people that you've grown accustomed to and maybe have an affinity for. It was not easy for me to say we need to not give Willie Castro a contract because I like Willie Castro. But when you look at the numbers, Willie Castro has not been very good for us. Same thing with Victor Reyes. He's 6'5", 194 pounds. Reminds me of the joke that Michael Scott made with Jim, like, "Jim, you're Gumby. You're 6'11", you weigh 90 pounds. Boom, roasted." Like, that's kind of who Victor Reyes is. And the reason why I kinda soured on Reyes is because he just beats the ball into the ground. His frame should be able to pound the baseball, and he just does not do it. And one guy that I talk to close to the organization, that I talk to quite often, I asked him that specific question. I go, excuse me, are they concerned about Reyes and his inability to hit for power? And he goes, yeah, they can't figure it out. They have no, like, not that they're not trying to figure it out, but he's like, they ask the same questions. Like, it does not make sense to them why he cannot hit the ball in the air. And so it's time for guys like that to go, to make way. Could they be making a flurry of moves, like maybe a Tyler Alexander as well, maybe a Brendan Davis as well, to protect prospects like Lupicius and Winsel Perez and Reese Olson, the kids that they traded, Michael Fulmer for, because he's also on the bubble as well? Yeah, they could, and it's kinda to Richard Moore's point here, right? You have to blow it up. If you want different results, make the change. I love that statement, "If you want different results," because I always tell people, right? Einstein's definition of insanity, trying the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. It's insanity is what it is if you don't blow it up. So there is a value in blowing it up, but you gotta replace those guys. And so if I'm replacing them, I'm starting with Barnhart. I'm going after Adam Frazier. I'm going after Michael Conforto. And there's another guy that maybe flies under the radar, and this is a very low risk, medium reward type signing, and it's more of a a depth signing, not death signing, but a depth signing. And it's Johan Camargo, who, if you remember, played with the Braves for a while and was one of their younger players coming up. Was released, signed with the Phillies, had a cup of coffee with the Phillies this year, and then was released on October 14th. He's a pretty darn good player. You look at his Fangraphs of it, this is his defensive statistics. As a third baseman right here, he's 4 defensive runs saved and 2 outs above average in 2022. But as a third baseman, overall, when he played in Atlanta, obviously he wasn't as good as Austin Riley, and they have their third baseman now. But as a third baseman for his career, 9 defensive runs saved and 10 outs above average. So a good defensive player with an okay offensive profile. And for his career, we'll just look at his career numbers down here at the bottom where it says total right above the last yellow line. His walk percentage, 7.4, a little low, needs to come up. Strikeout percentage, 20% of the time, 1 out of every 5 at bats, needs to go down. Hit for 255 for his career, 410 slugging percentage, 310 weighted on base average, and 90 weighted runs created, only 10% below major league average. Definitely a guy that you could sign, and you could even potentially sign to a minor league deal with an invite to spring training. Challenge him to make the team. Challenge him to make the decision difficult and give you a reason to put Ryan Kreidler in AAA to start the season. I like Kreidler. I think Kreidler needs some time. So Camargo is definitely an interesting get because there's solid performance that could happen. Not gonna light the world on fire, not gonna be a splash, not gonna be a superstar, but 10 outs above average for his career, 9 defensive runs saved, solid, solid. Not a world beater, but solid. That's the 4th guy that I would look at. And the 5th guy is somebody that we know quite well, and it's somebody that I think you could offer an extension to for 4 years, and it's this guy right here, Joe Jimenez. Look at all that red on those sliders. Expected batting average, 74th percentile. Chase rate, off the charts. Fastball velocity, higher percentile. Whiff rate, high percentile. Walk percentage, high percentile. Red is great, by the way, according to Baseball Savant. If I am looking at the future and I'm looking at the bullpen, which was surprisingly a strength for the Detroit Tigers this season, I think I'm locking up Joe Jimenez for at least 4 years. If I put this graphic up on the screen again, he's 27 years old. He will be going into his year 28. You lock him up for 4 years. He's projected to make 2.2 in arbitration this season. I offer him a 4-year, $24 million contract, $6 million a year. There's a reason why, and I'm going to get to that reason why. But that gives him a raise on arbitration this year, and it buys out 3 years of his free agency at, if he performs at the level he performed at this year continually, that's a very steep discount for the team. Do they need to save money? No, they don't need to save money. They don't have a lot on the books. It's like $135 million next year to start. That's before any of the arbitration guys get on the book. But at the same time, when you have a guy who performed as well as Joe Jimenez performed this year, and he's a homegrown guy, and the guy that you had pegged as your closer of the future, because God knows that Gregory Soto is not the closer for this team and should not be the closer for this team. A 12% walk rate from your closer is not good. Not good at all. And in fact, I included Soto on my should be off the 40-man list in Blueprint 1. Now, the only way that he goes off the 40-man is if you can make a trade for him, but the trade for him is not going to be a world-beating trade either. I was looking at the trade simulator that is market value for guys, and he only has like a 0.9 market value. There's things that can happen, and we're going to talk about some trades that could possibly be made next week on the corner. But I want to end tonight talking about Joe Jimenez, because I'm going to throw up a graphic right here that gives me reason to believe that he could be good. Everybody knows who Edwin Diaz is, and Edwin Diaz last year had a phenomenal season. In 2022, he kept that up and became an internet sensation with his closer entrance and Tommy Trump. But look at Jimenez's season this year. In their age 27 season, okay, Diaz being a year older, in their age 27 season, there's not a lot of difference there. Better ERA for Jimenez, 6 less innings pitched, 6 more hits given up, 2 less earned runs, 1 more home run given up. The ERA plus, better. That's an adjusted ERA for your ballpark. A 1.094 whip this year for Jimenez, and a 1.05 for Diaz in his age 27. Strikeout to walk rate, 5 strikeouts to every walk that he threw, which is higher than Diaz. There's a lot of potential for Joe Jimenez here, and it seems like he's on the right track, and it seems like he found it. And the best thing about Joe Jimenez is that he found that swag. And if I'm the Tigers, I'm signing him to a 4 or 5 year deal, $6 million per year, and seeing if he takes it. He's going to be locked up in arbitration anyways. I mean, we're going to pay him 2.2, maybe a little bit more next season. But if he could be the solid piece and the solidification of the bullpen at the end, the back end, he becomes your closer. Lang and Foley become your setup guys. Chafin's still around next year if he takes the player option, which most likely he's going to at $6.5 million. Soto becomes expendable. And, just to take what Richard Moore said here, take a bag of chips for Soto. You would take a bag of chips, but you would hope that you got a little bit more than those bag of chips, because obviously at the end of the day, you need to get guys into this system. And we're going to talk about those trades next week, because I think that and I got to look at a few of them and run them through some simulators just to see how the values work out. But I already got one in mind with the Brewers specifically that we can talk through to add more pieces to the depth. The question is, if you sign these 5 guys, Jimenez is already on your 40-man. If you sign these other 4 guys, if you sign Camargo, okay, you wouldn't necessarily have to add him to the 40-man right away. You would with Frazier, you would let's just say they all need to be signed, right? They all need to be added to the 40-man. You have expendable pieces on your 40-man roster. You have guys that could go, right? When you talk about um, I mean, even the guys that you just recently claimed, Palacios from the Twins could go. Uh, the catcher, Papirski could go. Um, Brendan Davis already been mentioned. Cody Clemens could even be dropped, right? Because we've seen I mean, he had a lot more run than Daz ever got. So there's definitely room for maneuvers, and I'll just gonna throw up Richard Moore's comment one last time to kinda end the show. If you want different results, then you have to do something different to get those results. And so a lot of the guys that are named on that 40-man roster, don't be surprised if 10 to 15 of them aren't there next year. Don't be surprised if they let them go, and if they aren't signed, they clear and all of that, they could be back in as minor league pieces, but it's just a way to get them off of the 40-man roster to make room for players that can actually have an impact on the 2023 season, because you cannot go through what you went through in 2022. 2022 was an entirely disappointment of a season. Entirely disappointing. Whether it was unmet expectations or even unreasonable expectations, you cannot do what you did in 2022. And I don't think with Scott Harris at the helm, they will. He's gotta get the right guys in place. He's gotta get the right type of GM, specifically somebody that has a really good eye for acquiring talent. But you gotta make deals, and you gotta get creative in those deals, which also could mean if you wanna make a few trades, you might have to part with some prospects that you've gathered that maybe you're not as high on because Al Avila's the one that drafted him. Maybe that's the potential. But we'll see, and I'm gonna come to you with a few trade scenarios. Be ready for the article that I'm gonna write on these 5 guys that the Tigers need to sign this offseason. It will be dropping within the next few days. I do appreciate each and every one of you that stuck around with me, this evening on Thursday night. I know it's late, and I know there's other things you could be doing, but you chose to spend it with me, and for that, I appreciate you. I do wanna remind you that wherever you are at on social media, make sure you're following Detroit Sports Nation. I've got content dropping all the time. We've got other content creators that are dropping content all the time because we all love Detroit sports. We all wanna see them succeed, and we love talking to you specifically about them. So make sure you're pounding that bell on YouTube to get the notifications for when our latest shows drop. This has been The Corner. I am AJ Reilly. I appreciate again everybody here that has been commenting and stopping by the Johnson Family Farms and Kevin and Richard and Mike. All of you guys that have been throwing comments in the chat. I appreciate it, and I will see you guys again next Thursday. We're going to talk about some trades that the Detroit Tigers can make to bolster their roster and make them a better team. But until we do that, as always,